Africa is a continent of over 1 billion people, yet questions of underdevelopment and malgovernance keep resurfacing on debate, given the several challenges the continent faces at the security level with issues like interstate conflict, terrorism and unconstitutional changes of government. Then the question of the continent's education system. Some analysts suggest that the young generation, especially those under 40, take up the challenge to reshape the continent's political narrative, while Africa builds transformative good governance and democratic institutions. It is true that the continent has made a significant progress in the liberation of the continent, but much is still to be done. And today with our guests, we shall be uncovering how to reshape Africa's political trajectory. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Talking Point. Stay with us. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Greetings, Africa. Thank you immensely for joining us once again on another edition of Talking Point over your Pan-African channel, For You Media Africa. You might be watching us over For You Television or listening to us on For You Radio Africa, of course, FM 96.3. Today we are evoking a new topic over Talking Point, and of course it is that how to reshape Africa's political trajectory. And of course, as guest this afternoon, I have the National Communications Secretary for the Popular Actions Party, PAP. He's equally a journalist. He's none other than Mr. Engineer Elvis Bani. Greetings to you, sir.
Yeah, good afternoon, Sharon. I think this is my first time on your platform since this year began. So I will wishing you a happy new year. And of course, a happy new year to all viewers of this prestigious channel. I think it's a pleasure for me to be guest on your program today, and I think and believe that it's going to be quite engaging this afternoon.
Thank you immensely for taking our time to join us on today's edition of Talking Point. And of course, we just want to recall that all through the year 2022, Africa actually witnessed a lot of stuff in its political sphere. And of course, this is a new year, 2023. We are asking the question, how can the young generation engage? How can leaders engage in order to reshape the political trajectory of the continent? And of course, the first question I would like to ask is, how do you assess the political cycle on the African continent?
Well, if we talk about politics as far as Africa is concerned, you have said it already, so much to happen in the year 2022. This is a new year, and of course, we cannot begin to project for the new year or for the future without wanting to retrospect as to what happened. But it's rather unfortunate that when you want to take a back look on the political scene in Africa, most often than not, we see that it is generally very, very bleak. It is generally a negative big image that we get of the political scene as far as Africa is concerned. If we want to talk in terms of the economy, we have just maybe less than 5 African countries here that we may count per se that are actually trying to showcase in the face of the world that they are doing something that is that moves these countries in the right direction. Most of the African countries, honestly speaking, in terms of economy, they are far behind. In terms of politics, it is even just the worst part of it all, and I think that is just what we are going to be looking at this afternoon. So if you are asking about my personal assessment as to the political scene in Africa, generally I will rate it at something far below even 20%.
Mr. Engineer Elvis, in order to proceed, we have recorded a lot of numerous challenges on the African continent, and as we speak, Africa is facing a lot of difficulties, especially in its political milieu, with leaders seen to have, of course, leaders now in this 21st century. Do you think they might have derailed from the path that great men in the past actually traced for this great continent?
You are talking about great men in the past and the present leaders who might have derailed. And I want to rather think and tell you sincerely, madam, that more than 80% of our African present so-called leaders actually don't even have any path they are working on. They are doing what we would describe in French, naviguer à vue. That is walking in the dark without knowing any exactly what direction you are taking. Now, when you talk about the path that was traced by the leaders of the past, you remember that before the so-called independence, I call it so-called independence, that African countries got from their former European occupiers, you discover that those who fought for this independence were young. They had a dream, they had a vision for Africa as a continent, you see. But unfortunately, you realize that most of these people who fought for this African independence did not even see the independence itself. Many of them, just at the verge of independence, either were imprisoned, they were killed, or something happened along the line. Some of them who took over and actually got into the independence eventually found themselves booted out or handing over power to the very wrong persons. And it's rather unfortunate that most of those we have today, it's true we call them leaders, but we really need to go back and maybe get a redefinition as to who a leader actually is, and then we find out if the present persons we have at the helm of the African countries actually do have those leadership qualities. Because when we talk and call someone a leader, these are people who are supposed to have dreams and visions for their respective countries and the continents per se. These are people who are supposed to have abilities and qualities, inputs that can automatically condition the output that we get from it. But unfortunately, when you look at most of them, they do not have any input. They do not have anything to showcase. They have never had any political agenda for some of them, and so it immediately translates onto the bad governance that we find almost all over the African continent today.
Thank you, Mansley. Now you evoked the issue of leadership. Now, when you're discussing politics, politics is all about good leadership. Now, in your opinion, who is a leader?
Like I have already said, when you talk about a leader, politically speaking, this should first and foremost be someone, let me say, who first of all is patriotic. You must first of all have that patriotic love for your country. Secondly, when you talk about a leader, politically speaking, it should be somebody who has an agenda for his people. When you talk about a political leader, it should be someone who has, like I've said, qualities and abilities. In other words, abilities and qualities to lead a nation. And remember that the last thing I may say here about the quality of a leader is that you are not made a leader because you are the best, but that the people, they have aspirations and they see in you, they see through you someone who can drive them towards achieving those aspirations. But unfortunately, when you look at our African context again today, you realize that most of the people that sometimes are even voted into office, they divert from their aspirations and expectations of the people who handed the power to them, and they transform and they become something of dictators. So at the end of the day, they serve their interest first, they serve their interest second, they serve their interest third. To them, after them, there is no other person. And there is something I would always like to describe in French as the pour moi virus. They have been attacked by that for me virus. Everything for them and nothing for anyone else. So unfortunately, again, I would say more than 80% of the so-called leaders we have today are not actually leaders per se. They are people who are individualistic, people who are self-centered, people who have no consideration for the masses that they are supposed to represent and lead.
Okay, thank you immensely. Now, of course, a bad leadership that's turned to malgovernance. And what I would like to ask you is, what accounts for the continent's current political situation with leaders in power for several terms, and of course, this issue of malgovernance on the African continent?
Can you ask the question again?
Okay, so I was saying that bad leadership actually leads to malgovernance when it comes to people in power. Now, given the current political situation in Africa, what accounts for this issue of the current political situation, and yet the issue of several leaders staying in power for multiple terms, and of course this issue of malgovernance?
Let me begin with the issue of leaders staying in power for a very long time. The very first thing I would shock you with is that I don't even want to blame it on them first. I blame it on the African population. I blame it on the masses, because it is said, or a philosopher said, that every people deserve their leadership. You see, when people have opted to be politically lukewarm, when people have opted not to develop any interest in the political lifestyle of their country, it is but normal that a handful of bad persons should take over leadership, should personalize leadership, and so they can stay in power for as long as possible. Secondly, most of the people we have today as the so-called leaders are people who have been positioned, especially in Francophone Africa, who have been positioned by foreign powers. So they are not even there to serve the interests of the people, and they are not there because the people want them to be there, but they are there because they are backed up and by foreign powers. And that's why we realize constant coup d'etats in most African countries, constant civil wars and all whatnot, because it is through this bloodshed that they successfully maintain themselves at the helm of their different African nations. So the first thing I would tell you is that if we must change leadership at the helm of most of our African states, the masses must first of all accept to get politically engaged. And that's why you realize that just a few days back, I think the 9th of this very month, I issued a letter, for instance, to the Cameroonian youth, in which I was calling on them to massively get engaged in to get registered on the electoral list, because no matter what we say, the numbers first of all counts. The numbers of those who first of all register and who partake in elections first of all counts. But when you realize that most African youth particularly have become so lukewarm and so uninterested to the point where to them it is like leadership is an issue for a particular people and it doesn't concern them. But unfortunately, what they fail to understand is that the people into whose hands you abandon the so-called leadership are the same people who sit and take very bad decisions, and at the end of the day, those who suffer the effect of it are the same persons, the same masses who have decided not to be active in the political lives of their respective countries. So that is the first thing that accounts for persons living or staying so long there. Now, you talk about bad governance. I have mentioned already before, madam, that when we talk about bad governance, first, when someone stays in power for too long, the truth is that even if in the earlier years of his governance he had good projects for the nation, he must have exhausted all his ideas. That is why there is a constant need for change at the helm of a nation, so that new persons come in with new ideas, with new blood, and they can cause the country to move forward. But when one man has to stay there for 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years, you exhaust all your ideas, and at the end of the day, you have nothing else to do than distract yourself with public funds. And in other words, it leads to corruption, it leads to embezzlement, it leads to tribalism, and all the other isms that you may think of.
Thank you immensely, sir. Now, in the letter you earlier cited, you said that the young generation, especially those below 40, needs to pick up the challenge and face things, especially when it comes to getting actively involved in politics. Now, given that the young generation are timidly getting involved in the political activities of the African continent, how can they reshape the political trajectory?
Thank you again for that question, and I must be sincere and honest, not to you, but to your audience and to the African youth who may be listening to me right now, to say that reshaping the political trajectory of our African continent and African countries depends entirely on the youth and not on those who are there as of now. Because the leaders who are there so far as of now, they would rather prefer it to maintain the status quo, to stay the way it is, because it will permit them to stay there again for as long as possible. So those who can reshape the political how do you call it again, trajectory of our continent are the youth. And how can they do this? I have said first, they must get politically involved. We should learn from history. We should understand, like I already said before here, that those who fought for independence in this country were the young. If you look at the first African leaders that took over power, if I should take the case of Cameroon, President Amadou Ahidjo, he was barely 36. And most of the ministers who today have become die-hard ministers on seats, most of them were in their 20s, early 30s when they took over leadership. So what I will keep telling the African youth, and like I said in the letter the other day, is let the African youth not allow themselves to be fooled by those who give them the impression that until you are 50 or 60, you cannot be a leader. No, there is no age at which we become responsible. African youth should understand that they are responsible enough and that they and they alone have their destiny in their own hands. We must make our voices heard on the political terrain, and we must do everything possible to be able to be part of the decision-making class in our respective countries. Nobody will give you your freedom on a platter of gold. Nobody will give you your liberty. It is something that we seize, and given the nature of things in our present African country, we understand therefore that if the African youth do not fight to make themselves accepted, if they do not fight to be recognized, if they do not fight to make their voices heard, there is no way a seat-type politician in this continent will walk to you one day to tell you, okay, now I think you are mature enough to take over leadership. We have to fight for it, and like I've said, fighting for it is not through the use of arms. The African youth should understand that the very first thing, the very first weapon that they need is their electoral cards. Be it in Cameroon, be it in Chad, be it in any other African country, the moment you have your electoral card, it is already a fatal weapon against the regimes that we have presently in Africa. People should register on the electoral list and make sure that when it is voting day, you go out there and you vote your conscience. Do not allow some people to come and fool you with bottles of refined oil or some few kilograms of rice or salt or sugar or whatever thing. People should learn to act and act out of their consciences and vote for those people that they are very much convinced can be able to deliver the goods and of course work in fulfilling their aspirations as a people.
Definitely. Now, we always evoke this issue of solidarity amongst African leaders. Many in a time, unity, it's something that African leaders, the African continents cannot actually evolve without. How can we foster solidarity amongst African leaders? How can they foster solidarity, unity amongst themselves for the betterment of this continent?
If we are talking about fostering solidarity again, Sharon, believe you me, we cannot successfully talk about fostering solidarity for African progress, for advancement in Africa with the present set of leaders we have. Because first, I often like to repeat it on political platforms like this one, that most of them that we have are not even Africans. It is not because they share the same color like you and I that we think they are Africans. We know of many of them here who are leaders today, but with foreign nationalities. We know of many of them who studied out of the continent and only came back to occupy the positions they are occupying today. In other words, they are stooges that were brought into the continent by foreign powers, and they are there to serve not the interests of the African continent, but the interest of those persons who place them where they are. So if we are talking about African solidarity, I may be referring you back to leaders like Paul Kagame. I may be referring you back to the young brave leaders we are seeing today, like Traore, like Assimi Goita, like Dumboya. Those are the people that we may want to count on them. That if we want to talk about fostering solidarity, we can count on some of these people who have proven beyond reasonable doubt that they have the interests of the African continent at heart, that they have the interests of their respective countries and the people at heart. Those are the people we can count on and want to talk about fostering solidarity for the progress of the African continent. But most of the others, believe you me, we cannot talk about solidarity with them because they are working for France, they are working for other African countries. Today we see even Russia, many countries are turning towards Russia. I am not so much of a fan of Russia because at the end of the day, we don't know some of the shady deals that they may be signing at the background with Russia, such that at the end of the day, France may not be there, but Russia may come in to just control from where France left. I am not a fan of people who want to think that turning towards China is it is an advancement for Africa. I said no. If today we are as backward as we are, it is because I keep insisting, my dear, we have people who have never first been leaders, people who have never had any political agenda for their continent, people who have never even worked in the first place to the betterment of the continent. I was reading somewhere in a certain platform yesterday, and someone asked a question. If the Europeans were to withdraw from Africa today, what will Africa do? In other words, to him, we need them to be there for Africa to become, or for Africa to advance. But have we ever advanced with these people? No. At one point in time, I think that they need to withdraw for us to be able to think. And we cannot think and think squarely under the present African leaders that we have. We first of all need a change of system. We need a change of the blood that is there. And then young leaders who are first and foremost patriotic may now come in and think of how they can foster solidarity. Come to think of it, look at those political parties we have in most of the African countries. I will come back into the case of my country, Cameroon. You will realize that even those who call themselves opposition are unable to agree and form a winning coalition. Why? Because they are so self-centered, and so at the end of the day, they cannot even find a common ground on which they can agree to be able to fight the present system that is there. Those are the type of people, I tell you, are not leaders. And so I think that if we want to talk about fostering solidarity amongst African leaders to advance, we must first of all begin by changing those who are there first, making sure that those who take over power are first and foremost Africans, Pan-Africanists, people who think Africa, who breathe Africa, who reason Africa, and so from there we can now reason as to what we need to do next to be able to advance.
Thank you immensely, Mr. Engineer Elvis Bali. Just to reiterate that you are the National Communications Secretary for the Popular Actions Party. In order to proceed, now you evoke the issue of China. It comes at a time when Chinese newly appointed Foreign Minister Qin Gang is on the African continent. He arrived yesterday actually to conceal the China-Africa relations, given that several Western powers have actually visited this continent in recent months. Would you term this a second scramble for the African continent?
Would I term this
a second scramble?
I think the scramble started a long time ago already. You see, and I will want to borrow the words of late Bob Marley, may his soul rest in peace. We must try to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery. We must try to emancipate ourselves from political slavery. We must try to emancipate ourselves from economic slavery. All these Western powers do not come here for anything positive for Africa. They come for their interest. That's one thing I keep saying we must learn to understand. And that's why I will keep repeating to you, we cannot move ahead as a people if we have to do it under the present dispensation, if we have to do it under the present so-called leadership that we have, because they are the same people who have sold us out to the Western powers from the 60s till today, more than 60 years after of supposed independence, and we cannot showcase of anything. Come to think of it, if China with all what they have today as technology, if they truly love us, if they truly want us to see Africa develop, or let me say Cameroon develop, they will not carry out our timber out of the continent and bring us toothpick of very bad quality. But those are the type of things that our leaders bring in from China, toothpick, and they boast of it, and they want to make it sound like it was an exploit that we set out timber to bring into pig, that we set out timber and we import paper. In other words, when you come to think of it, 60 years after, what do we produce? What has China, what has France, what has Germany, Britain, US, Russia, what have they helped Africans to be able to produce in this country that we think that it is only now in 2023 and in the years to come that they are going to do it? I repeat again, these people come in for nothing short of their own interest, and I'm afraid that of all the countries even coming in today, China is even the worst and the most dangerous of all the countries we must be aware of. Because when you look at the rate at which these guys are going, they are capable of even buying the whole of Africa in years to come. And unfortunately, our leaders are leasing out all our arable lands to them. You come to a country, the Chinese own the banks, they have police stations, they own the ports in countries, they do agriculture, they fry fritters, or what you may call pop-off in the quarters. So at the end of the day, is that the type of development a developed country can be bringing into an African country? Coming to fry pop-off by the roadside? I said no. When they come to us, we have the resources. And I also regret one thing here. When we hear leaders like our own president of Cameroon, His Excellency Biya Paul of recent in the US, going to announce to the Western world that we still have minerals on taps and all whatnot. I wonder if we do not have engineers of us in this country who can tap and refine these products for us. Must we go announce the whole world what we have in our continent? Do you think that the US doesn't announce because they do not have minerals too? Do you think they come to Africa because they don't have minerals? These are things I say we must decry, and I bet you, madam, we will not advance if we have to continue working under such leadership. We need new African blood. We need a new generation of African leaders who have the spirit that those who fought for the African independence had. Only there and then shall we be able to talk African and be able to progress. And so when the other Western powers will be coming into Africa, they will be coming to meet people who are ready to sign a win-win partnership with them, and not people who come and they sign a 99-year contract with you, and at the end of the 99 years, you cannot showcase of a single road that they were able to construct. I will insist and remain in Cameroon that when you go down south and to the east, all the timber has been cut off from those regions and taken out of the country. But there are no macadamized roads that go to that part of the to those regions in Cameroon. Children there sit on bare floor to study. They don't have classrooms, they don't have benches, but they produce the best of timber in the world. I cannot call that development. I cannot call that a win-win business deal between my country, Cameroon, and France or China or any other country.
Mm. Thank you immensely. Of course, it's really a sad situation. Now, you brought the issue of a lot of resources on the African continent in respective African countries. Indeed, African countries are rich in their respective minerals, in their respective resources which they've got. And now, the young generation that's coming into power now, how can they make use of these resources in order to excel in different levels, be it economy, be it agriculture, and so on?
Be to give our African brothers out there who have gone and have had that opportunity to benefit of a certain level of education in different areas of life, walks of life, to be able to come back and we give them the room to help exploit these minerals, and then we see how we can be able to transform them within the African continent. Secondly, if we had good leadership, or if we have a new set of leaders who think African and want to see the African countries grow, we will make sure that when a European country comes into Africa, for instance, and has to exploit any mineral in any field, we give you a condition. If there is a certain company we have seen in your country that we think is good, we condition you, you give us that company here in exchange of the mineral you want. And so you realize that by the time you are done with expressing that particular mineral for the length of time that it must have been agreed in the contract, that company will stay, and of course it will go along in employing Africans and of course generating other jobs and opportunities for Africans. But come to think of it, when we have leaders who will prefer to lease out minerals in exchange of physical cash that ends in the pockets of a handful of people, then I tell you it is a problem. And like I said, it is not like the Western powers do not understand what is happening. It is not like the IMF, it is not like the World Bank, it is not like the UN and other of its agencies do not know what is happening in Africa, but that they prefer to behave as if they are not conscious about what is happening, and they keep pushing you down the abyss of corruption and embezzlement, because they know that by so doing you remain a permanent mental, political and economic slave to them, and so they will always come to you as if they are coming to take you out of a certain situation, and they keep drowning you the more into it. So talking about African youth making use of their minerals, I think, like she insists, if there is a change of mentality at the level of the leadership, if there is a change of the systems in the leadership we already have in Africa, I think we can review this issue of double nationality and ensure that our brothers out there can have that leeway to come back into their respective countries, to come back into Africa and bring forth the knowledge that they have been able to gather or garner from the outside world, and by so doing, we shall see how together we can put hands on deck to be able to develop our continent.
So please, do you think we can link the aspect of the education system to this question of leadership in Africa?
It is very much linked. We are not the ones to link it. It has been linked right from the pre-colonial period. Remember that when you read the letter that King Leopold of Belgium issued to the missionaries when they were sending them to Africa in 1883, it was clearly spelled out in that letter. Teach the African youth how to read and write, but do not teach them how to reason. And it is rather unfortunate, 60 years after, our colonial leaders have made sure that they maintain just that system of education. We have been clamoring that there should be a review of the educational system, but our present leaders, who are European stooges, will not accept to change the system. Why? Because when they keep training people who do not reason, automatically you don't even question their leadership. You don't even question why one man should stay in power for 40 years. You don't even have, the moment you have a bottle of beer for yourself, you think that that is an achievement in life. That is why the system has remained the way it is. And of course, Africa has remained where it is. Because people are not educated to think. People are not educated to be creative, but rather just to be able to read and write. And believe me that even the reading and the writing we are talking about today is degrading as the days go by. So I think that education is a key factor until we review our educational system. And like I say, go back to China again, we were just talking about. Children from the primaries, they start studying technology. Here they taught us about a certain ICT, and you go to school for computer class and ICT. They don't even have one computer in an entire school. Yet they are teaching children computer science and ICT. Let them introduce technology to us. Let them give us the type of technology we see children practice in China from the primaries, in Japan and other countries, and so our own children will be able to have faculties that are sharpened to push them to be curious enough and want to discover things by themselves and want to invent, because it is that curiosity that will push our African children to become more and more creative and inventive. But that cannot happen when you focus on just the literary part of education that does not permit anyone to reason out of the box. So I think that it is very necessary that our African leaders, that our governments should review the educational system and put in place a system that gives room for reasoning, that gives room for creativity, that gives room for curiosity.
Indeed, but then we have the thought that the young generation actually they shy away from getting involved in matters of the continent because the leaders themselves do not encourage them to push through with their relative talents that they may have, which could assist the continent in excelling. So now, how or what role can leaders play in order to push the young generation to go to the forefront for the betterment of the continent?
Again, I'll straight by saying I'm afraid we cannot want to depend on the present leaders to motivate the youth to become more engaged and more interested in the African politics and the development of the continent. Because, like I said, by being so lukewarm and shying away from the political sphere of the African continent, it rather comforts the leaders. That is the problem. So I am rather focused more on the youth, who should be the ones to get to the realization that they have potentials and see what they can do within themselves to be able to fight for that. Just to permit me, madam, to announce here on your platform that I have an association called Living Dreams International. What is it all about? Our objective within Living Dreams is to see how we go towards youth, detect the talents in the youth, and we try to see how we can help them earn a living through those talents. You see, we are trying to see how we can go into the society, we detect people, the underprivileged, and we give them some sort of short-term trainings on sustainable activities that can permit them generate a certain income and at least give them back a certain degree or sense of confidence. Because what the present leadership have actually done is to give the youth the impression that they are a nobody, they are not qualified, they have no potentials, and so they cannot do anything. That is why we realize that in Cameroon, for instance, if you are not 50, for instance, you don't dream of anything concrete for yourself. Because that is the way. In other words, we have fathers in our continent, in our country, who have killed the dream in their own children. Because the fathers are greedy and they know that by killing the dream in you, you will never question why they have to be there for long. Because they give the impression that they have to be there in order to take care of you. But you cannot take care of a child eternally. Remember that when you look at the wars in Africa, who are those who mastermind the wars in Africa? They are political leaders. Who are the political leaders? They are our fathers. But who are those who go and die at the war front? The youth. Those are the young soldiers who sacrifice their blood, not fighting to defend the interests of their states, not fighting to defend and the integrities of their countries, not fighting to defend the people for whom they took an oath to defend, but they died to defend the interests of a handful of, permit me use the word, political criminals who have taken their countries hostage and are simply just using those youths to do what? To foster and secure their positions in power. That is the unfortunate situation, and that is the picture of politics in Africa. All people who sit down there create situations, problems that could be solved politically, they prefer to take them militarily and send the youth to go and die at the battlefront to safeguard their own personal interests. So again, I want to think that if we want to talk about reshaping the political trajectory of our continent, I am calling back on the African youth to become more conscious as to the fact that they have potentials. They should go back to our history before independence. They will realize that those who fought against the Europeans, those who fought fervently and laid their lives on the life wire for independence, were young people below 30 below 40, and of course they achieved what they were able to achieve. And today we read them their names in history. We admire them for that, and I think that we can go back to history and redefine our history and rewrite our history by taking over from them. We should not depend on those who are on seats today, because those ones will never give us the opportunity, because they are not Africans and they are not fighting for the interest of the African continent or that of the youth.
Indeed, we have countries like Nigeria, we have countries in the Sahel region that are actually facing Islamic insurgencies. Now, given that the young are actually the ones at the forefront of fighting in wars, now it's sad because you notice that this young population are actually fighting amongst each other, given or away from the Islamic insurgencies. You see countries going to war with themselves, and this is going on the daily basis. Now, how can the young leaders who are supposed to reshape the political path of the continent, how can they react towards this given situation?
Thank you again, madam. Like you say, it's a sad situation. I would not want to go too far to the Sahel region because my own country is an example. If you take between 2016 to today, close to 7 years after, or let me take from late 2017 when the crisis actually translated itself into an armed conflict. Come to think of it, the Ambazonian fighters in Cameroon today are young people. The Cameroonian military goes to fight, they are young people. So in essence, all those who have died from 2016 to today are young people. But who are those behind manipulating and encouraging and fueling this fight? They are the old politicians. And that's why I will answer your question by saying, young political leaders, some of us who hope to take the reins of power in this country and in this continent, we are calling on the young fighters, be they the Ambazonian fighters, for instance, in Cameroon, be they those in the military, that they should understand that they are both victims of a handful of gangsters who are manipulating them to their best interest and not the interest of the masses. That is the first thing they need to understand. And that is why we are saying they should rather reconsider dropping arms, going to register massively on electoral lists, so that when time comes for elections, they can use their ballot papers as the guns in their hands to be able to vote out these old oligarchies that have spoiled the continent, that have spoiled the country, and bring in new blood that can be able to deliver the aspirations of the people. I think that is the only thing we can do as of now, because we cannot encourage that wars continue all over Africa. But like I say, you will discover a war that will last 20 years. And 20 years after, he who was head of state is still the same head of state. But when you look at the number of persons who have died, thousands and thousands of young people lose their lives. Why? Defending not the interest of the state, but the interest of a handful of people who do not totally care about the people. Come to think of it, if I remain in Cameroon, for instance, you will realize that from 2016 to today, the Anglophone crisis has never, and I say never in capital letters, been tabled at an ordinary or an extraordinary session in any of the houses of assembly, be it the lower house of assembly or the upper house of assembly. They have never tabled the issue there for discussion. It means that what? They simply do not have the interest to resolve the issue. You see? But every day, the government is recruiting young Cameroonians, training them and sending them to the forefront to go and die. Every day, the Ambazonian promoters or sponsors are recruiting young fighters, sending them to the forefront, and they are going and they are dying. It's unfortunate, that's the way it is, and that's why I would rather say my message from this year henceforth is directly, particularly to the youth. We should no longer allow ourselves to be manipulated by any person, be they, in fact, let no one manipulate us, because I want to think. They say a fool at 40 is a fool for life. Believe you me, if I take the case of Cameroon today, we are more than 60 years old in independence, and if I take the case of the present regime, we are more than 40 years since Mr. Biya took over power. It means that a child who was born at the time in 1982 is at least 40 years of today. You cannot be 40 years old and want to accept to be a fool. Being a fool at 40, like you say, like it's the adage says, you are a fool for life. Let us be wise enough and understand that we have come of age. They have fooled us for some time, like Bob Marley said, but they cannot continue to fool us all through our lives. We should use the ballot boxes and vote out all these bad governments that we have all over Africa and usher in new blood. At least there is need for us to have a taste of some other form of leadership and not the same people for 40 years.
Thank you immensely. So, of course, we noticed that across Africa there has been a wind of change, and then we have young leaders that actually are ascending into power to see how they can reshape the narrative of these so much cherished continent. Now, what message could you have for these leaders, given you are a young leader yourself and you are trying to promote or helping revamping the political narrative of the African continent?
Please, can you just ask the question again, please?
So I was saying that there has been a wind of change across Africa, and we have young leaders that are ascending to power. Now, given you're a young leader and you're some of the promoters that are participating in helping to reshape the political narrative of Africa, what message can you give out to these young leaders that are coming to power?
My message will be that young African leaders, you initially spoke about collaboration to foster development in Africa. Young African leaders should learn to collaborate. Our forebears have failed us. I don't know if they ever collaborated or not, but if at all they did, they also collaborated to sell out the African continent. Let young leaders today all over Africa learn to collaborate, to be able to foster development in Africa, to be able to usher in new blood in all the other African countries where we still have the old hands clean onto power. And of course, when I talk about young leaders all over Africa fostering themselves together, what I would tell you is that at the background, believe you me, I may be in Cameroon today, but we are doing everything to get ourselves hooked up with all other young African leaders all over the African continent to see how together we can always try to promote change in whatever African country that it may be. It is not because I am in Cameroon that I may not be able to travel to any other African country to be able to fight for change in that country. Those are some of the things we are struggling to do at the background. It is true, I have to say it here, but that is what we are doing. In other words, we are out to foster Pan-Africanism. We should understand that injustice anywhere in Africa is injustice everywhere in Africa. If there is something going on wrong in Cameroon, all other young African leaders in all other parts of Africa should be able to decry that form of injustice that is going on here in Cameroon. If there is any justice that is done anywhere, we should be able to stand up as a people and we appreciate, so that those who practice that form of justice should be able to continue with in that line. So that is what we are doing, and that is the message I can pass across. African leaders within their countries should first of all learn to constitute themselves, come together as a people, and then see how they can link up to other African young leaders in other parts of the country. I would like to call on people like the Assimi Goitas and the Traorés. I want to think that they really need to bring their forces together. They need to work hand in glove, because I know it is not an easy task for them to challenge the diaspora, to challenge those foreign, those Western powers. When I say diaspora, I mean the Western powers. It is not easy for them, and I think that they must come together, and that is just what we are talking about. And it comes back to what I earlier mentioned here, madam, that it is very unfortunate that when you come into a country like mine, Cameroon here, you realize people who call themselves opposition, but who are unable to agree and come together on a common platform to unite forces and be able to challenge that one party, that one man, that strong man that has been there for 40 years and has brought the country down on its knees. That is the unfortunate situation in Cameroon, and of course it is just a reflection of what happens in most other African countries, and we keep sensitizing, we keep calling on people to apply to their consciences first, so that something positive can follow.
Exactly. Ladies and gentlemen, we are gradually coming to the end of today's edition of Talking Points over your Pan-African channel for you Media Africa. And with my guest this afternoon, Mr. Engineer Elvis Bane, who is the National Communications Secretary for the Popular Actions Party here in Cameroon. We are discussing on how to reshape the political trajectory of the African continent, given that over the years Africa has actually witnessed a lot of challenges at various milieux. Now as we are gradually coming to the end of today's edition of Talking Points, so I'd like to ask you, what in your opinion is the way forward?
The way forward, madam, African youth, Cameroonian youth should understand, if there is so much bribery in the country, so much embezzlement, so much of tribalism, favoritism, so much impunity, it is because we have accepted to let it be that way. And so we need to stand up, we need to awaken from our slumber, for we have slept for too many years. We have slept for 40 years. We have slept for 60 years. We need to awaken from our slumber and take our full responsibility into our hands. That is the way forward. And when I talk about taking our full responsibility, I repeat again, there is at least no country where elections are not organized. We understand that the regimes in place will not want to, like in the case of Cameroon, remodify the electoral code. We understand that they may not even want to encourage the Cameroonian youth or African youth to go in for massive electoral registration, but we of the opposition, who aspire to take power in Africa and to bring in change, we are calling on African youth to be more conscious of as to what they have. There is strength in unity. There is strength in numbers. Let us register massively on the electoral list so that when that day comes for the voting, then you will realize that when 15 million persons go out there to vote, it becomes very, very difficult and almost impossible for a regime to go and rig elections. They successfully rig elections because you cannot be in a country of over 35 million people and you have less than 2 million of them who partake in votes, and we are not even too sure of the figures that are given to us. But if we could have 15 million Cameroonians going out there to vote, 15 million Cameroonians who vote and vote their consciences, then we are very, very sure that it would become very, very difficult for the regime in place to fraud, no matter how hard they try it. So I think that is the way forward. We should be politically conscious as to what we have not done and what we are supposed to do. We should be politically conscious of the powers that we have. We should be politically conscious that the future of this country and our own future and destiny lies in our hands and in our hands alone. No one will come to fight our fights for us. No one will come to fight our battles for us. We have a road to walk and no one will walk the road for us. We alone can do that and no other person can do that for us. It is not the Western countries that will come to do that, because when they are coming, it is only to foster their own interest in our continent and, of course, ruining us the more.
Pathways, what a take-home message can you give to all the televiewers and of course the listeners of this program, so in order to awaken the spirit of Pan-Africanism in them?
Well, first thing, we should feel African. We should be proud of who we are. And if we are truly proud of who we are as Africans, if we are truly proud of who we are as Cameroonians, then we should be patriotic enough to be able to do the right thing for the continent, or for the country and for the continent. I think that's the take-home message, because I believe that some of these things begin from that lack of patriotism. When someone is truly patriotic, that person will do just what is right for his country or continent. When someone is truly patriotic, he will not allow the next person do that which is not correct for his country or his continent. So I think patriotism is the first thing we need to depend on. That Pan-Africanist spirit is what we should encourage and develop in ourselves first, and then see how we can encourage in other persons to ensure that there is growth in this continent and of course in Africa as a whole.
Thank you immensely, sir, for taking our time to join us on today's edition of Talking Points.
It's been a pleasure, madam.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of today's edition of Talking Points over your Pan-African channel for you Media Africa. Our guest for today was Mr. Engineer Elvis Bane, the National Communications Secretary for the Popular Actions Party. In meantime, I have been Jix Nabuse. For presentation, programs continue over your Pan-African channel.